Hey everybody, it's your old pal John, the history buff. We're going to talk about 10 ways World War II could have ended differently. I've been burned before, so I'm hoping that this is the video is what it says it's going to be about. So we'll see. By the way, you can get, I wouldn't say necessarily outtakes, but you can get videos that I thought were going one way and had nothing to do with the title through a membership. And also there's merch out there. So, like I said, I do this kind of in my spare time, and any help would be appreciated. But that's side note. 10 ways in which World War II could have ended differently. Let's check it out.
10 ways World War II could have ended differently. Number 10, Operation Unthinkable.
Oh, by the way, I don't watch these ahead of time, unlike some YouTubers. Oh, burn.
As the following 5 decades showed, the Second World War didn't end on entirely comfortable terms between the Western powers and Russia. But in 1998, we learned that Churchill had considered a more extreme plan for after the Yalta Conference to discuss Europe's post-war reorganisation. Scheduled for the 1st of July 1945, Churchill had conceived a plan for British, US, Polish and German forces to liberate Poland and East Germany from Stalin's communist encroachment into Europe. The idea was to get a square deal for Poland after it became clear that Stalin betrayed his promise for free elections. But it soon became a defensive plan once the Allies realised taking on the mighty Russian bear was, to quote the National Archives, fanciful. In any case, if this operation actually went ahead, it could have gone one of 2 ways. Either the coalition forces took East Germany and Poland, leaving an awfully uncomfortable standoff with the USSR, or it would have failed, got messy, and caused World War III immediately after World War II.
Yeah.
Come on, everyone knows to at least give it a year before the sequel.
Yeah, that would have been a weird thing because it showed 2 things. I mean, I know the audience here is predominantly British. So the Americans probably would not have gone along with this. Certainly, Patton, if you know Patton on the American side, he would have been fine with it. But we still had a lot of soldiers that were fighting, or were about to fight in the invasion, or that were sent over to the Pacific for the invasion of Japan. That was a very real thing. You remember that wasn't done until early to mid-August of 1945, so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, the British would have, I don't want to say they would have been on their own, but I don't think they would have had tons of American support. I don't think had FDR lived, I don't think he would have been in support of the plan. Plus, when you look at the numbers actually of Russians versus in the East versus Allies in the West, I'm sorry, but and I'll argue this up and down, the Russians took the brunt of the war. I don't know why there are people who say they don't. Everyone had their specific part, and I'm not ever diminishing the amount that the British contributed. That was they stayed in they kept everybody essentially in the war, and that's important. But yeah, you're really at the point of World War III. I know Churchill had and other people, of course, a lot of other people had a lot of contempt for socialist and communist ideology. But we were, the enemy of your enemy is your friend. And after Germany was defeated, he was very clear at stating what other people kind of were realizing, was that the Russians weren't necessarily our friends. I mean, after all, they invaded half of Poland too. It's just that Hitler did it first. And the Russians got away with their part of Poland. So this was going to be a tough one. So yeah, I'm glad it didn't happen. I don't think it would have worked out.
Number 9, Operation Sea Lion.
The invasion
History buffs or Christopher Nolan fans will know that
Britain.
the UK was at a particularly low point after the evacuation of Dunkirk in 1940. In fact, we were in such a sorry state that Hitler ordered Führer Directive 16, which stated, the aim of this operation will be to eliminate the English homeland as a base for the prosecution of the war against Germany, and, if necessary, to occupy it. The operation in question was called Sea Lion, which involved a naval invasion followed by the capture of MPs, intellectuals, and outspoken enemies of the Reich.
Yep.
It was originally planned for just 8 weeks after Dunkirk. However, luckily that never happened, since the Luftwaffe's defeat in the Battle of Britain stopped Germany from controlling the skies to support the invasion. As a result, the invasion was delayed again and again. Eventually, Sea Lion was abandoned in favour of Operation Barbarossa, which aimed to take Moscow and topple the Soviet Union. That disastrous campaign eventually cost Germany more than 4 million lives, around 80% of its total war losses. So, who knows? If Hitler went with Sea Lion over Barbarossa, his war effort might have not ended quite so poorly.
I'll be honest with you, I do believe that Operation Sea Lion had little chance of success. The English Navy, there I did it again. Go ahead, yell at me in the comments. The British Navy, one of the, if not the largest, it was, I do believe it was the largest at the time, aside from maybe Japan. But anyway, it makes no sense. They first of all, a cross-channel invasion, that's one thing, but how do you support that? Not with the Navy, not with the British Navy around. You absolutely are unable to do that. You have to rely on airdrops, and as we know from the Battle of Britain, the British Air Force, the RAF was not yet in the real hardcore desperation that we thought. And by the way, when it did get down to it, at the height of the Battle of Britain, the Royal Navy wasn't as desperate as well. I mean, it was a tough spot. Don't ever get me wrong, but they weren't impotent. Put it that way. And at this point, I think between the Navy and the Air Force, they would have no chance. The Germans would have no chance of getting far inland. I know there are all sorts of what ifs about this, but I don't believe there would be any chance. I mean, even with the submarines and the German, I think they're called E-boats, which is what they were trying to use, there really would have been no chance. I mean, between the Navy and the Royal Air Force, no, I don't think so. You still had a lot of people and civilians willing to fight. You had defenses. You had radar. I honestly think it would have been sheer destruction on the German part.
Number 8. No Pearl Harbor. It's not a controversial argument to say that Pearl Harbor was the major catalyst for US involvement in World War II. Before then, there was a significant anti-interventionist movement in the country.
It's true.
But that largely dissipated in the face of Japanese aggression.
Yes.
That kind of galvanization is precisely the opposite of what Japan wanted. Naval Commander Isoroku Yamamoto believed it would bring American morale down to such an extent that it cannot be recovered, when in fact it made it obvious that entering the war was unavoidable. Even noted isolationist Charles Lindbergh said, "I can see nothing to do under these circumstances except fight.
Yeah.
If I had been in Congress, I certainly would have voted for a declaration of war." But had Pearl Harbor not happened, there's a reasonable chance that the isolationists would have gotten their way, and the US either didn't enter the war or engaged in a reduced capacity. The reduced threat on the Western Front as a result may well have given Germany more resources to take on Stalin and maybe even win. Number 7.
Yeah, I think Pearl Harbor definitely was the catalyst for getting the U.S. into the war. It's not like, we didn't, cut off the supply of oil to Japan or anything like that, but we did. And that had a lot to do with it. But I think one way or another we would have been involved in the war. And there's information that Roosevelt was, and this is kind of 50-50, whether Roosevelt knew or did not know that the invasion was coming or that war was likely. I mean, there were negotiations in the years up to Pearl Harbor. So this wasn't like a big, at least to the executives of the country, the ones who were in the know. It wasn't inconceivable thing that this was going to happen. We were getting prepared for it. We just were not prepared for it. There were a lot of different war plans as to, what if the Japanese did here? What if they invaded here? I think if they hadn't had Pearl Harbor, they would have invaded the Philippines. Either way, they were in a corner. They needed to do something. The problem was that Hitler then declared war on the United States, and he had no obligation to do that. To me, that's the big fumble. Well, it's a big fumble, but yeah, we would have ended up going to war one way or another.
Operation Downfall. Dropping the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was undoubtedly a defining factor in the war, not to mention in history. But it wasn't always the plan. Before the nuclear option was taken, Operation Downfall was Plan A. This would have been a traditional invasion, and the largest in history at that, which unsurprisingly would have taken a much greater toll on US forces than forcing the issue via nukes. In fact, it would have been so costly that many historians argue Truman dropped the bomb to avoid it. According to historical writer Michael Peck, the American invasion would likely have succeeded, but it could have added an extra 2 years to the war effort and cost as many as 1 million casualties. That would have tripled America's total death toll. After that, the outcome is anyone's guess. Such a fatigued and war-torn US might have shied away from involving itself in world leadership for decades to come. It's even plausible that the memory of Operation Downfall would have kept America out of Vietnam.
That's an interesting point. Yeah. Operation Downfall, if the atomic bomb had not been, I guess, invented when it did, made operational when it did, this was the plan, Operation Downfall. And through the previous invasions, I mean, there was still fighting going on in the Philippines. There was Iwo Jima. There was, all sorts of stuff. As we got towards the end of the war, the understanding that the Japanese were so tenacious and so headstrong in their defense was becoming a very real realization. We were talking needing hundreds of thousands of, over millions of soldiers, but you're talking hundreds of thousands of casualties. You're talking people who would defend their homeland for almost, any way they could. Women also, it was the mindset. If that happened, that could have very well changed a lot of things. The other part was the Russian part. If you study the invasion of Manchuria from Russia, it was not even a week where they had gone as far as the North Korean, as far as North Korea. I mean, they just, even though there were second and third tier Japanese soldiers in Manchuria, they still just steamrolled right over the place. So one of the biggest factors in the Japanese surrender was actually after the atomic bomb was the invasion of from the Russians. That was very scary because of how quickly they took over Manchuria. So I don't know if they would have kept going to the point of Operation Downfall, but if it had happened, it would have been a bloodbath, big bloodbath. I mean, you're talking, they were like something like 6 different entry points, and I don't even want to think about this. That's just terrible, but yeah.
Number 6. Operation Valkyrie succeeds.
Oh, yeah.
The failed plot to assassinate Hitler in 1944 has gone down as one of the great what-if moments in history. Having been so close yet so far from success, it's hard not to wonder what would have happened if the Führer's reign was cut short. Just for some context, Operation Valkyrie was a plan led by Klaus von Stauffenberg for the German Reserve Army to overthrow the Nazi regime. And the July 20th plot was the actual assassination attempt where a briefcase bomb happened to move and only injure Hitler. If all had gone to plan, it's tempting to think that it would have broken Hitler's vice grip on Germany and heralded the end of the conflict. But that's probably wishful thinking. Since there was still very much a cult of personality around Hitler, we might have seen the assassination spun as martyrdom to rally the people. Or let's say, for example, that Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, became the new Führer. We know that he secretly attempted to broker peace with the Allies behind Hitler's back in the real world. So with Adolf gone so early, we might have seen a less tortuously slow Nazi defeat.
Okay, yeah. There's a movie about this called Valkyrie. I think Tom Cruise is in it, so it's not accurate, very accurate, I should say, but it's an interesting take on it. Yeah, if Hitler had been killed, I mean, historians don't do the what ifs. They really don't, because we focus on history. That's what I've been taught. But I do believe there would have been a brokered peace, especially after the invasion of Normandy. And I think that would have been it. I mean, it would have been a hard negotiation, because I don't think the Russians, the USSR would have been very open to negotiation after that. But I do think, and this is me speaking only, my take on it. I do think a new government would have come in, and they would have been weary after all the war, and they probably would have tried to sue for peace. It probably wouldn't have been quick, but they would have tried to sue for peace. I do believe, and I don't think, personally, I don't think other people do. So let me know what you all think. I always welcome your remarks in the comments. And before you say something that I've missed, obviously check the comments down below, and check to see if somebody else has written it first.
5. Hokushin Run. In the years preceding World War II, right up to Pearl Harbor, Imperial Japan had two competing strategies in its military. There was Hokushin Run, aka the Strike North faction, and Nanshin Run, also known as the Strike South faction. The two opposing doctrines sought to either expand north into Russia and China, or south into the Pacific and take on the Western powers. As we know, they chose the latter and felt the consequences. But what if Hokushin Run won the day? It's hard to say for sure, of course, but if Hirohito took on Stalin, Siberia likely would have been a prime target. We can somewhat safely assume that Japan would have fared well against the Siberian defences, since its forces hadn't been worn down to nearly the extent of the other major powers. That could have had a cascade effect on the Eastern Front with Germany. If Stalin had to divert forces to fight Japan, or if the Siberian reinforcements on the Eastern Front weren't available, Hitler's Operation Barbarossa could have drastically shifted the war effort in his favour. Number 4.
That's kind of interesting. First of all, they still need oil. And this is assuming they didn't hit Pearl Harbor and start, and start the war. The war against the rest of the powers, I should say, not just China. But I don't see that as being a major factor. I mean, the one thing the Russians really had going for them was the T-34. That was a major deal, and it's been proven. Oops, sorry about that. It's been proven that they were able to steamroll over a lot of different things. There's nothing to get in Siberia other than border clashes, and I don't know if I said this or not, but I was at least thinking it. General Zhukov defeated the Japanese soundly, so I'm sure this was not, and this was before the German invasion of Russia, of the USSR. So I don't think there'd be a lot of, well, for open-minded people, I don't think there'd be a lot of availability to do that. I don't know why they would do that. Honestly, I don't buy that as an option, but I don't think the outcome would be very good. Anyway, that's just me there. Okay, Nazi nukes.
Or Nazi nukes. Historians are split over whether Hiroshima and Nagasaki was actually the move that ended the war. But you could argue that if someone less restrained, say a fascist expansionist leader, had access to nuclear technology, their continued use could have brought the Allies to their knees. That's especially true considering how vulnerable London was to German V-2 bombers. Now, imagine if they were nukes. That said, there are a few big reasons that didn't happen. For one thing, German military science was heavily focused on Hitler's so-called superweapons, like the outlandishly large V3 cannon and the Sun gun, most of which turned out to be a waste of money and manpower. On top of that, the politicization of education under the Nazi regime led to an exodus of mathematicians and scientists, making progress much slower than it could have been. And lastly, the theoretical physics that formed the basis of nuclear tech was considered Jewish science by the Nazi Party, so it wasn't given the attention it should have had.
Yeah, and just to add on to what he said, the bottom line of the whole thing was that the Germans were not very far. As a matter of fact, some people said that they really just had no real. They did have interest in it in the beginning, but it was not emphasized towards the end. So when the scramble to grab the scientists came about, it wasn't. I mean, it was helpful. The rocketry part of things, that was very helpful. But otherwise, my understanding is they hadn't gotten as far as anyone had thought. So and the idea of Jewish science, that was a thing. That was you know, cutting off your. We have a phrase called "cutting off your nose to spite your face." It's just like, you know, things could have gone differently.
Number 3, Hitler takes Russia. As we've seen, Operation Barbarossa was pretty much make or break for Germany. Just imagine the sheer amount of resources that went into marching on the Eastern Front in 1941, getting within 20 kilometers of Moscow and then being pushed back to Berlin and eventually defeated in 1945. But what would happen if Germany succeeded in Russia? Well, in a book titled Unmaking the West, historian Holger H. Herwig suggests the easiest way was if Stalin left Moscow for his second home called Kuntsevo-Dachau, which he very nearly did in real life.
Yep.
Herwig suggested that if fail-safe explosives inside Kuntsevo were triggered and killed Stalin, the Soviet organizational structure would crumble. Then he postulates that the leftover Soviet leadership would cut a deal to give Hitler all of European Russia. With such an extreme resource boost, Hitler would likely have the manpower and equipment to take Western Europe pretty convincingly. But here's the twist. Herwig reckoned that nuclear weaponry would still hand America victory. So, in this reality, with Russia, Germany and the UK pacified, America would emerge as the only world power. Number 2.
That's kind of interesting. I mean, the Russians were pretty close to losing. I would say, yeah, pretty close to losing. It was the British and American determination to get supplies over that was a thing. But resiliency of Russia is a thing. I mean, they're used to taking. They're just look at their history. They're used to taking heavy casualties, which is very sad when it comes to modern day human rights. But for them, or how they view people. But yeah, I don't know. That's all I got there. I don't know.
Spanish involvement. Back in the real world, Spanish dictator Francisco Franco never entered the war in any official capacity, though he was friendly enough with Hitler to send a division to fight on the Eastern Front. But what if Franco followed through on his promise to join the Tripartite Pact with Germany, Italy and Japan? Would it have tipped the balance in the West? Probably not, as it turns out. You see, Spain had been economically decimated by its civil war, with 10 to 15% wiped off its national wealth and a 28% drop in per capita income over just 4 years. According to Professor Mark Grimsley, that economic hardship would have actually made Spain somewhat of a liability to the Axis powers, since it would have required substantial aid to get involved. So Grimsley theorised that the most likely outcome would be that once the Allies liberated Italy, Spain would see the writing on the wall and surrender, with Franco replaced by monarchy once again. So admittedly not the most wild change, but it would have meant around 40 years less fascism for Spain.
All right, so yeah, when it came to Franco, I mean, yes, they were both fascists, but they were tired after the war. Number one, number two, there was not. They were still Franco was still consolidating power. Do you remember how other powers came in to help out, and people came from all over the place to help. You had you had the USSR, you had Italy, you had Germany. From the States, you had the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. Britain and France, you guys both had a brigade. I can't remember what it's called, or volunteer units, I should say. And people came to help. But I think if for any reason they were able to get involved in the war, they would take Gibraltar, which they would want, and they have to go against Portugal. There's Portugal and Britain have been historical. I mean, like since the 1600s, I think, allies. And you're talking about a few places in North Africa, but it would be tough for control of the Mediterranean. But I think that might be it. I don't think they had the manpower to send it out. It was too close towards the end of their civil war. Franklin could have probably lost power. Yep.
Number 1.
Oh, and on top of that, it probably Germany would have had to divert more manpower to Spain, just like they did with Italy. You know, it would have been like having another Italy in the war. Kind of a sideshow that Hitler would have had to deal with.
D-Day fails. D-Day tops most war enthusiasts' lists of important battles in World War II. So it probably makes sense to examine why the outcome was so crucial. Let's say the effort fails. What on earth would have happened? It's pretty likely that the failure would have spelled the end of FDR's presidency, whether because he chose not to run again or because he was defeated by an isolationist candidate. World War II is often touted as the springboard to America's global dominance, so turning away from the world at such a crucial juncture could have massively altered the global order. And across the Atlantic, it's likely the burden fell on Russia to beat back the Nazis completely. If Stalin did emerge victorious, his real-world post-war actions proved his eagerness to expand the USSR. That means wherever else Russia liberated in this timeline would have become a Soviet satellite state. So whether communism or fascism won that bout, it's pretty likely that Europe would have fallen under authoritarian rule.
All right, I gotta say, when it comes to D-Day, I've always been in the camp that there would have been another try, first of all. The feeling in the United States, at least, and probably in Great Britain, was very similar. There were people that were trying to join the army in the United States, and they were deemed for age, which meant that they were, for whatever reason, they were unable to do things because they had a heart murmur or some sort of thing that kept them out of the military. And there were I can't say the word, but a lot of those that happened because people could not go and fight in the United States. I don't know about Britain if that were the case or not, but I think even if I can't remember who was the vice president, Hamlin. I can't remember, but if I don't think anyone would have taken us. I don't think any other president would have been keen to change the war. We would have just probably pushed on, just in another way. There would have either been a second D-Day or like an Operation Anvil might have been the push. We were already making progress in Italy. That might have been held down. The day of D-Day is the day before they captured Rome. We'd probably have better generals down there, and hopefully that kind of thing in Italy. But maybe it would have been an invasion of Greece. Who knows? But I don't think we would have gotten out of it. I think that's just silly. We were too invested in the war. Let me know what you think about Great Britain doing that.
Good job we won, right? So that was 10.
All right, so that's that. What do you guys think? Am I wrong? Remember, it's a live reaction. I may have said something incorrect or used a wrong name. What I'm mostly interested in is not you guys picking it apart, some little thing that I've said that whatever, but look at the general ideas and let me know what your thoughts are on. Do you think different? I totally welcome that. I love it. Otherwise consider looking at some merch, and don't forget about memberships. You can watch me have a freaking meltdown as I watch a video that is incorrectly labeled. All right, everybody, like, share, subscribe, comment. Bye.